everybody, this is the Wikstrand. Where the fuck is spring? Well, as the late great Prince once said, sometimes it snows in April. You're right about that, Other Me, but still, Jesus Christ, it's freezing today. That is true, but don't you have a really long review of a very, very big movie to do? You know what, Other Me? You're absolutely correct. So, when it comes to, the production of a movie, few movies comes close to the absolute madness and chaos that was Cleopatra. It is widely believed to have been one of the most expensive movies that has ever been made. I don't know, how big a budget did this movie have? I've seen different, numbers counting from, 300 million to $450 million in today's value. When you're looking at it, you kind of realize how, massive this was. All the sets, all the massive mass sequences, all the big stars, and all, the costumes and the props and the boats and all that things. But it was also, delays and infighting and egos and people being fired during production and other things as well. But the thing is, how good is this movie, compared to other big Roman historical spectacles of the time, like your El Cids or your Fall of the Roman Empires or Quo Vadis, Ben-Hur, Spartacus, all of those movies. Well, I will say this. This movie by far has the best story of the whole bunch, because this is one of these cases where reality outclasses fiction by a country mile. So let's take a look at what was one of the biggest movies of all time, but let's see how good it is, shall we? This is Cleopatra. If you're not that familiar with, the story of Cleopatra, Mark Antony, Caesar, and Octavian, the future Augustus, the story is so big, spectacular, and has so many fascinating details surrounding it that I don't think William Shakespeare could have, written a better thing if he tried. So Julius Caesar goes to Egypt, where he meets the charismatic, legendary Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, and he helps her, defeat and usurp her co-king and also husband and also brother, Jack. And afterwards, they start hanging out together and, starting a relationship, and she bears him a child. And he takes Cleopatra, to Rome and presents her and things like that. And then, Caesar is murdered in the Senate, and she has to flee back to Egypt, but she wants to, preserve Egypt's independence. Therefore, she allies herself with one of the closest allies to Caesar, Mark Antony, played in this movie by Richard Burton. And then they rises up against the Roman Empire, and defeat and tragedy and misery follows in their footsteps. And it's such a big and epic story. So this should be a slam dunk win, right? Right? Well, not really. This movie has a lot of downsides to themselves, but I will start by, highlighting the really strong parts that this movie has, because it has some amazingly strong parts. Elizabeth Taylor is a movie star's movie star. She's a superstar's superstar. The presence of her in every sequences that she's in, which is, most of the sequences, are absolutely magnificent. Her monolithic presence on screen is absolutely untouchable. With all the fantastic costumes, 65 of them according to some things I read somewhere. And, she has fantastic chemistry with both Rex Harrison, who plays Julius Caesar. Rex Harrison is fantastic in this movie. And I will say that even though he's not quite as good, Richard Burton has put on his big boy pants for this thing where he plays, Mark Antony. The only thing that kind of stands out is Octavian, played by Roddy McDowall, who is not, the most memorable thing about this movie. A more memorable performance is, however, Martin Landau as Rufio, who is one of, the most reliable co-stars of this era of Hollywood. He was very, very good. The thing is that they're very good, and the sets are so impressive. They are monstrously big, and the mass sequences are incredibly impressive. You know, the sequence when Cleopatra is sort of introduced to Rome and she comes in this huge contraption that, you know, is being pulled in. You have to pause for a second to realize something. Everything that I see here is actually there. No CGI, no green screens. They had to build all of these stupid ass big nonsense things and be able to, you know, to drag this thing in with all the choreography and all the sets and all the extras. It is so impressive that you're actually forgetting that they're, you know, devoting a pretty big part of the movie introducing a character that has already been introduced an hour prior, you know, in the sequence where she rolls out of the carpet. Apparently it was a basket according to some, but I don't know. It was iconic, but it was sort of lackluster compared to this thing. And this movie is an experience. Despite it clocking in at, you know, almost 4 hours, considering how much ground they have to cover in, you know, when it comes to the story itself. I understand why they needed that, but here is where the sort of problem starts to creep in, because 4 hours is a long time, and this movie can feel very, very long at some points. And sometimes this movie is severely dragging its feet, and it is a slug to get through some of these sequences, and it is a little bit weirdly structured at times. I'll get to that a little bit later. And we also have a small problem that I have with this movie, is the fact that some of the sequences, especially in the later part of the movie, can feel a little stagey, and the acting is a little bit, I don't know. The acting is very good in some parts, but sometimes it can be a little soap opera-ish and it can be a little bit stagey. You know, the guy who directed this actually directed a movie called Julius Caesar, which is a much better movie, where the stagey acting actually worked in a much better way. By the way, Julius Caesar with Marlon Brando is one of my absolute favorite movies of the 1950s. If you've never seen that movie, see that movie. Anyway, now it becomes very clear after just a little bit of, you know, watching this movie, that this movie is more about access rather than action. It is more about soap operas rather than, you know, intriguing and scheming and political machinations and things of that sort, which is also a thing I think they did in Spartacus that wasn't beneficial to that movie. Again, a movie that I think is better than Cleopatra, but that is a story for another time. But one of the major problems that I have with Cleopatra is the fact that the Burton section of the movie, the Mark Antony bit of the movie, which is, you know, the second half of the movie, I don't know. For some reason, despite having the more interesting story bit, it didn't feel quite as good as the thing with Julius Caesar. I don't know if it is because that Rex Harrison was better in this movie than Richard Burton, or it's the fact that I actually like Rex Harrison better than I do with Richard Burton, or is it because that segment of the movie had a lot more, you know, soap opera things going on, but they also had the Battle of Actium, which should have been something that would have been so impressive that would have blown your socks out of your ears, because I mean, they have an almost unlimited amount of money to spend on this movie, so why does the Battle of Actium look okay? Maybe I am too damaged by too much, you know, new movies where they have, you know, been able to make these sea battles and battles on land look a lot better and look more impressive than what they could do. And because they cannot rely on, you know, special effects that we have today, maybe that is why those sequences can sometimes look a little bit lackluster. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just too damaged by really, really great Roman movies such as Centurion and Gladiator. But as I said, Cleopatra looks fantastic, and it is so fascinating that despite them, you know, not presenting this in the best way that they could have, it is still such a fascinating story that you're hooked from the beginning until the end. And as I said, when you're, you know, approaching the end, you really feel that this was an experience. And as I said, the 4 hours can sometimes feel very excessive, especially, you know, considering that you're spending a lot of time of sequences, you know, when Mark Antony gets hammered, when he's watching the, you know, belly dancers and the, you know, yelling at each other, and the sequence where, as I said, Cleopatra is being, you know, rolled into Rome and being presented, and, you know, those sequences isn't really that necessary. They need them to motivate this, you know, massive budget that they're having. But we also have a lot of interesting historical things that sort of get glossed over. there is no happy middle here. And if Hollywood ever decide to do a remake of Cleopatra, I really doubt that they would allow that thing to go over 3 hours, because they would probably insist on it going on maybe 2.5, maybe 2:40 or anything like that. But you really need a lot of time devoted to this, because it is such a fascinating story, Cleopatra's life. But in the end, Cleopatra is a good movie despite having a lot of flaws to itself, because of Elizabeth Taylor's fantastic presence, because of how big this movie is, because of how impressive it is, and because of how amazing it looks. Even though there are movies, that has better battle sequences, such as, El Cid, also with Elizabeth Taylor and Charlton Heston, that came out at the same time. And it is not as good as a Spartacus, but it is better in my opinion than Ben-Hur. It's been a while since I've seen Ben-Hur, but as I remembered it, I think that this movie is actually better. And especially it is better than a movie like Quo Vadis, who is one of the most sluggish movies that I've ever seen in my entire life. Jesus Christ, you knew from the very, very first frame where that one was going, and it just went on and on and on and wouldn't fucking end. So should you see Cleopatra? I think yes. This is a movie that you should see at least once, because it is so big and because it has this fantastic look to itself, and the atmosphere and everything has this amazing old school look that I absolutely love. And despite this movie not being, viewed as this fantastic classic or anything like that, because it was a big flop. And I don't know if you can say that it killed the big historical spectacle, but there wasn't too many of those made after this movie was made, because it was just such a big undertaking that nobody would fund anything that was so big ever again. So it is fascinating to look at as kind of an end of an era thing. So it is a movie that is filled with very good actors putting on some sometimes fantastic performance that sometimes can get a little stagey and a little bit overacted. And it is a big, beautiful, boisterous spectacle that needs to be viewed at least once. There are better movies in the same genre, but hell, this is maybe the biggest of them all. Cleopatra is a massive, spectacular movie with some major flaws to it. It may be surface over substance, but when the surface looks as good as this, oh my god, I give Cleopatra 56 points. It's Elizabeth Taylor's most iconic performance, not her best, but it is a performance for the ages nevertheless. And as I said, Rex Harrison is fantastic, Richard Burton is great in this one, at least for the most part, and some sequences are nothing short of absolutely amazing and will stay with you for a long time. This is a movie that you will not forget. So which one is your favorite when it comes to these, big historical spectacles? Comment below and I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much. Fuck you, Snow.